Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the community history behind potlucks. Far beyond just long tables laden with heavy casseroles, we're going to look at how the humble church potluck is actually this profound engine of human connection and cultural preservation. We'll be diving into the deeply rooted rituals, the surprisingly strict unwritten rules, and the fascinating geographic evolution of the foods that really define our local gatherings. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world does a neon green Jell-O salad have to do with social capital? Well, it's actually really interesting. The bizarre sensory nostalgia of our community foods points to a deep sociological truth about human bonding. When we picture a potluck, we probably picture those neon green Jell-O salads dotted with mini marshmallows, right? Or bubbling trays of macaroni. But beneath those quirky, hyper-regional favorites lies this incredibly powerful framework for building trust, passing down generational knowledge, and creating what sociologists call social capital. Ultimately, the food is simply the vehicle for the community. And we see this absolutely incredible regional diversity in these meals. Just contrast the crushed Doritos of a Midwestern hot dish with the historical staple of chili served with cinnamon rolls out west. Take that chili and cinnamon roll combo, for instance. To an outsider, that sounds baffling, right? But it has very distinct roots. Some historians trace it back to early 20th century logging camps that needed massive, high-calorie meals. Others trace it directly to retired Midwestern farm wives who brought their incredible bread-baking traditions right into local school cafeterias. So the foods we gather around, they're living histories of the very people who shaped our regions. All right, let's move right into Section 1, Anatomy of a Potluck, Rules and Requirements. So there's actually a really rigid architecture to these meals. It's often driven by what you could call the Hemi engine of the meat and macaroni hot dish, fueled by vast quantities of cheap brewed coffee. If we look at the legendary Midwestern Lutheran Potluck, for example, the menu is almost architectural. First, you have your hot dish, maybe tuna or ground beef, bound together by the classic can of cream of mushroom soup. Then you have a vegetable side, which is often green beans with almonds or a warm potato salad. Next comes the salad, usually involving iceberg lettuce or some variation of molten Jell-O. And finally, dessert. But hovering above all of this, absolutely essential, is the coffee. There's actually incredible humor in community forums discussing these unwritten culinary rules. Members constantly joke about coffee being this holy requirement, and they'll mock the horrors of the dreaded gray beef burgers in rural Iowa. One online commenter even jokingly called coffee the fourth sacrament, insisting it has to be brewed with a gallon in a giant metal barrel percolator. No fancy roasts allowed here. And of course, every region has its culinary misfires that locals just sort of endure purely out of politeness. Like those crumbly gray beef burgers served at rural youth nights, which are usually choked down only with a really heavy layer of mustard and pickles. But here's the crucial point. A true potluck requires participatory levity. You are expected to contribute a fully prepared dish and actively engage with folks way outside your immediate circle. The unwritten rules are strict, guys. You bring enough to feed your family, plus a little extra. The dish absolutely must be ready to eat, because commandeering the church kitchen just to heat your casserole, major faux pas. But honestly, perhaps the most important rule of the whole shebang is physical. No holy huddles. You are actively encouraged not to bunch up with your own household. The entire goal here is to sit with strangers, cross-pollinate, and build brand new connections over a plate of scalloped potatoes. Okay, bringing us to Section 2, Rituals of Cultural Conservation, Preserving History. If we really want to understand how immigrant history is literally baked into food, we can look at the bierach. It's a handheld meal perfectly designed for farmers who needed a hot lunch out in the fields. Essentially, a bierach is just a little pillow of yeasty dough stuffed with spiced ground beef, cabbage, and onions. It's hearty, it's completely portable, and for generations of German-Russian descendants in the American Midwest, it represents a very real, direct link to their ancestors. And what's amazing is that we can trace the exact geographic journey of this one single recipe over centuries. It evolved from a royal Russian invitation all the way to a beloved Nebraskan staple. Back in the 1700s, Catherine the Great actually invited Germans to settle in Russia. While they were there, they adapted the Russian pierogi into the bierach. Later, when they fled the Russian military draft in the late 1800s, they brought that bierach straight to the American Great Plains. Fast forward a bit to the 1940s, and a woman named Sally Everett starts selling them to factory workers in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, she couldn't trademark a cultural term like bierach, so instead she called it a runza. Today, The runza is a beloved, quintessential piece of Nebraska's identity, all born from centuries of migration. You see, rural community preservation is so deeply rooted. In places like Mary's home, Missouri, family reunions literally take place in the geographic reality between the historical graves of ancestors and the communal event hall. A family reunion, or a Knights of Columbus fish fry, isn't just a party for these folks. It's a deeply grounded ritual. People are gathering to eat mere yards away from the headstones of the very ancestors who first settled the land and perfected the exact recipes they are eating today. And it's not just about the food itself, it's the skills. Passing down time-intensive skills like canning and curing meat ensures that vital subsistence methods remain in the community as accessible, living knowledge. In our current age of massive grocery store chains, the knowledge of how to pressure can vegetables or salt cure a summer sausage could so easily be lost. But through community cookbooks and these shared potluck meals, these hardcore survival techniques are documented, they're practiced, and they're passed down to the next generation. It essentially masks critical subsistence training as just a really fun community dinner. You even see this culture in community cookbooks, which often contain tasteful humor, seamlessly blending folksy jokes and moral advice right alongside the instructions for pickling and smoking. It just goes to show that these compiled cookbooks, often put together by locals for locals, aren't just dry ingredient lists. They are historical records of the community's values, their humor, and their shared worldview, perfectly preserved on a bookshelf. So sharing handmade foods, homemade elderberry wines, and hand-stitched quilts during these rituals actively validates members and solidifies their importance within the community network. Picture this. At these massive rural family reunions, attendees might win a door prize of a quilt stitched collaboratively by the family matriarchs over the previous year. To receive that quilt, or a jar of homemade blackberry wine, is to be tangibly wrapped in the care, the labor, and the validation of your community. It physically tells you that you belong. Let's move to our final section, Section 3, the ultimate third place, social capital. So while they might not boost a town's GDP, these mobile, pop-up third places generate the essential social capital and trust that literally holds small towns together. If you're not familiar, a third place is a sociological term for a space that isn't work and isn't home. It's the local diner, it's the rural coffee shop, or that church basement during a potluck. They are the living rooms of civic life. The human need for communal storytelling, gossiping, and collective problem-solving has always required physical, welcoming gathering spaces. It's hardwired into us. Just like the historic taverns of centuries past, a community needs a physical anchor. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's a nostalgic 1950s diner, a fast food joint, or just a folding table in a parish hall. What really matters is that it is accessible and that it facilitates real face-to-face connection. Over time, these spaces become memory keepers. They are the quiet engines of social cohesion, affectionately known by locals as Gossip Place Central, where all of the town's problems get solved. Locals will describe these diners and coffee shops as places where, if you need to know the who, what, when, where, or how, you just go sit in a booth between 6 and 8 in the morning. Information is exchanged, deep trust is built, and the social fabric of the entire community is maintained, one cup of coffee or one slice of pie at a time. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought about your own physical connections and where your social capital is truly being nourished today. We've seen how a simple hot dish or a handheld beer rock carries literal centuries of history, and our church basement can serve as the ultimate glue for a community. In an era where so much of our interaction has migrated onto digital platforms, we really have to ask ourselves, where are our modern third places? Are we still making the time to sit across the table from strangers, break bread, and build the trust that holds society together? Think about that the next time you're invited to bring a side dish. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.